Good morning and welcome to the Food Bank of Southeastern Virginia and the Eastern Shore. My name is Leona Benson and I am the Food Rescue Program Coordinator. And along with that, I also teach our food safety classes for our partner agencies, our staff, and volunteers. So we are going to be doing our food safety training from here on forth through our Zoom recording. Unfortunately, due to the unforeseen circumstances, we have been unable to do our in-class training. So this will be the way that we'll be doing our food safety training from here on forth. So, which means at the end of this course, there will be a test that will be required for you to take. That way we know the course was completed. And then upon completion, you will receive a certificate stating that you did go through your food safety training, which will be good for an additional 2 years. In addition to that, I just want to apologize to everyone for getting this information out late. Again, because of the circumstances, we had to come up with a way to continue on with the classes, and this was the safest way to do it. So I thank everyone for their patience. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. So the information that we're going over today is pretty much the same information that we go over in the classroom setting. So if you do have your books with you, you're more than welcome to go ahead and follow along with me, or you can go ahead and follow along with the slide. So with that being said, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So again, this is going to be Serve Safe Food Handlers Training for food banking. All right, and the information that we're gonna go over today is food safety is important, how food becomes unsafe, your role in keeping food safe, understanding food allergens, and preventing food allergen contamination. So the first three items listed here are the three different ways that food can become unsafe. The first one is biological, the second one is physical and chemical. So when we talk about biological, we're talking about the items that we cannot see with the naked eye. These are the items that we would need to actually see under a microscope. So we're talking about our viruses, our parasites, our fungi, and our bacterias. Okay, so these are the items that can actually also definitely get someone sick. So we always want to make sure that we're constantly cleaning surfaces, especially now due to the circumstances that we have going on at the moment. We always want to make sure that we're sanitizing and cleaning those surfaces after we have come in contact with them and also before. Then moving on, we've got our physical. These are the items that we can actually see that may happen to get into a particular piece of food. So as you can see there in the picture, we've actually got a piece of jewelry. It looks like an earring that actually got into that box of lettuce. So any type of broken glass, maybe metal shavings, hair, bandages, a fingernail, those would be considered physical hazards. Then we move on to our chemicals. So our chemicals will be any type of cleaners that we may use to clean, any type of bleach, any type of aerosol spray that you may use to spray in the air, anything of that sort that could possibly make food unsafe, which is why we always recommend to make sure you always have those items separate from each other during storage and even during use. So you want to make sure when you are cleaning, you don't have any food around to where that cleaning could possibly get into that food. And also during storage, we want to make sure we have those items separated from each other as well. Okay, then moving on into the next slide here, we're going to go into the different ways of how people can make food unsafe. The first one here is poor personal hygiene, transferring pathogens from your body to food. Then we've got cross-contamination, transferring pathogens from one surface to another or from one food to another. Then we've got time and temperature abuse, letting food stay too long at temperatures that are good for pathogen growth. And then we've got poor cleaning and sanitizing, transferring pathogens from one incorrectly cleaned surface to food. So based on that, we've got our first applying your knowledge here. A couple of questions. The very first one says, leaving raw chicken breasts on a pallet in a loading area that is not refrigerated. What is that considered? What do you guys think? I'm going to go with time and temperature abuse. And if you went with that same answer, that is correct. The very next one is keeping produce that raw meat juices have leaked on. What is that considered? Cross-contamination. If you have that, that is correct as well. The very next one, sneezing on food. That will be considered poor personal hygiene. And last but not least, scraping off food from an otherwise clean food storage container, is considered poor cleaning and sanitizing. All right, so if you got all of those four correct, then you are on your way. Now we're going to go into detail based on those four different sections there of how people can make food safe and go into depth. So the very first one, it says you always want to make sure you practice good personal hygiene. Don't transfer pathogens from your body to food. And then it asks you here a couple of ways that this gentleman is actually making the food safe. What practices is he actually following? So we see here that he's got all the correct garments that he needs to have in order to go ahead and do that particular repackaging that he is doing there. He's got his beard net, he's got his hair net, he's got gloves on, he's got an apron on, and he's also got clean clothing on as well. Control time and temperature of food. Do not let food stay too long at temperatures that are good for pathogen growth. So those of you that are still leaving food out on your counter or in your sink, that is definitely a no-no. I have always said that to you all in class every single time. You want to make sure that you're following the correct steps if you're thawing food out. And those steps are either in the microwave. If you're going to be cooking, you need to make sure that you're doing that as soon as possible. The cooking process. Then also thawing it in the sink. You have to make sure that you have constant running water of 70 degrees or lower. And then also in the refrigerator as well, which may take a little bit more time depending on what it is that you're actually trying to cook and when you're trying to cook it. So those are your four different safe ways that you can actually thaw food out instead of leaving it out on the counter or in the sink to thaw. So it's asking you here also, how is temperature being controlled in this photo? So it says that temperature is being checked and also ensures that food is held at the correct temperature. So I'm sure those of you that are familiar, the ones that are in the food rescue program, right now, those agencies are required to take temperatures of their cold and frozen items every time that they're doing a pickup at the grocery store. That instruction has not come down the pike yet for all partner agencies, but like I kind of warn everyone and give everyone the heads up that there's a possibility that Feeding America may make that a requirement in the future. So just so you're aware about it and you know exactly what the process is. And when it comes down the pike, you already know what it is that you actually need to do when that time comes. So meaning when you come here to shop at the food bank, that means you'll have to take temperatures of your cold and frozen items as well when you leave here, and then once you get back to your agency as well, to make sure that that food is being transported, which is why we always suggest having those freezer blankets and coolers for that reason as well. Moving forward, then we've got preventing cross-contamination. Don't transfer pathogens from one food to another, and don't transfer pathogens from one surface to another. So cross-contamination can happen both ways. It can happen with foods, and it can happen with surfaces as well. So it's showing you here in this picture, how is that being prevented? So we've got our strawberries, which are our ready-to-eat foods, that are sitting above meats that are at the very bottom. So we definitely want to make sure that we're not storing our refrigerator vice versa, where the meat is on top and then we've got our strawberries at the very bottom, okay? Because that's basically how the cross-contamination can take place. And then the last portion of these four different ways, we've got cleaning and sanitizing surfaces correctly. Okay, so keep everything clean and clean and sanitize anything that touches food. And it asks here, how is that being practiced? So it says that everything is being cleaned and sanitized in a 3-compartment sink. And you don't necessarily always have to have a 3-compartment sink in order for you to clean and sanitize correctly. That can also take place as well, just as well in a regular sink as well. All right, then we're going to shift on over to understanding food allergens. Okay, so here we've got our most common food allergens. There are a lot of allergens out there that folks are allergic to, but there are some major food allergens that possibly can cause severe harm if an individual actually consumes them. And sometimes they don't even have to consume them. Sometimes it can even just be the smell of that item that can severely affect a person. All right, so the first thing that we've got here is our dairy. Then we've got our eggs. We've got our soy, our fish, our tree nuts, peanuts, shellfish, and then wheat. Okay, so preventing cross contact, we want to make sure that we're cleaning the surfaces that have come in contact with an allergen, making sure that we're inspecting any food, if there's any leaks or any holes or anything of that sort that may cause cross contact. We also want to make sure that we're washing our hands and changing gloves after handling an allergen, and also handling an allergen-free product as well. So we're making sure that there's no cross contact that has come in contact with the allergen-free food and the allergen food as well. And also making sure that they're separated from each other during storage, and then do not store food containing allergens above allergen-free food. And then, of course, if you can, at the most, use separate containers to store your allergen-free food and your allergen foods as well from each other, to avoid that from happening. Then we're moving on to some applying your knowledge questions here. So we've got some pictures that show you different types of food, asking which are your most common food allergens. So we've got 4 different products here. We've got some tea, cod, wheat flour, and melons. So out of the 4, which ones do you think are our common food allergens? So we know it's definitely not tea. We know it's definitely cod, because we mentioned before fish. And again, that wheat flour, okay? So wheat and fish being your most common food allergens there. Then we've got a couple of more here. Definitely peanut butter is a known food allergen. Crab legs for sure, that shellfish. I'm not gonna say citrus fruits, bell peppers, potatoes, mushrooms, tomatoes, although some people may be allergic to tomatoes due to, or even citrusy foods due to the acidity. But again, it is not considered a common food allergen. So I will definitely say the last one is that pecan pie. All right. Then we've got a few more here. No squash, no eggplant, definitely your soybeans, no rice products, but definitely your eggs. And last but not least, your ice cream. Okay, so preventing cross contact from spilled food. So what you want to do is make sure that you are immediately isolating the spilled food containing an allergen from another food product. Definitely inspect the surrounding products for contact with spilled food. Dispose of any open product in contact with spilled food. And sometimes, depending on what the item is, if it's something that is vacuum sealed, it may not necessarily have to be discarded if a food allergen comes in contact with it. Depending on what it is, you could possibly just either rinse it off or wipe it off, because of the fact that that item happens to be vacuum sealed. There's no way that that particular allergen can actually seep into that non-allergen food. So in that particular case, you may not always have to actually dispose of that food that comes in contact with an allergen food. So you may just have to rinse it off, wipe it off, and you're good to go. But if it's something that happens to have any type of opening to where that particular allergen could have leaked into that food item, then you may have to dispose of it. And of course, make sure you clean and sanitize that area as well. Okay, so then we're going to shift on to our the beginning when we went over the different ways that people can make sick. We're going to shift into those 4 different ways, going into depth. And the very first one is good personal hygiene. All right, and the concepts you'll learn here is how and when to wash your hands, where to wash your hands, other hand care guidelines, what to wear, and other important practices. Okay, so the very first one here that it discusses is hand washing. So of course we know right now, especially with the circumstances that we have going on, we always want to make sure that we're washing our hands at all times. Now more than ever, hand washing is the most important thing to do. It always has been, but because of the virus that we have going on, we always want to make sure that we're washing our hands at all times. And as it says here, hands can transfer pathogens to food. Hand washing is a critical step to avoid food contamination, and hand washing should take about 20 seconds. So it gives you the steps here from 1 to 5, which I am not going to go into detail. You can read that on your own as far as the instructions of how to wash your hands, but it does provide that information to you. Okay, but I will just briefly discuss after washing your hands too, the most important thing not to do. So after we wash our hands, with our freshly cleaned hands, we want to make sure that we are not touching anything else when we leave the restroom, especially turning off the faucet. If we have to turn that faucet off, if it's not an automatic faucet, make sure that you're using a paper towel to do so. And also, once we're leaving out of that restroom, if there is a door handle on that door that you need to grab, make sure you're also using a paper towel to do that as well, because those are the 2 most germiest areas in the restroom. So you want to make sure after you've washed your hands that you are not touching those areas again, because you're simply just going to be contaminating your hands once again. So just make sure you're using paper towels to turn the faucet off and grab that door handle when you're leaving out. All right. So it's asking you here some different reasons as to whether or not you should wash your hands. So it's asking you, wash your hands after using the restroom. Absolutely. Right? We want to make sure we're also washing our hands after we're touching our hair, face, or body. We also want to make sure we're washing our hands after handling raw meat, seafood, or poultry before and after. And also wash your hands after you touch your clothing or aprons. Okay, a couple of more ways here. We want to make sure we're washing our hands. Yes, after taking out the garbage. Absolutely. We also want to make sure we're washing our hands after we're handling any chemicals that can make food unsafe. And we want to make sure we're washing our hands if we're doing any sneezing, coughing, or using a tissue. And then we also, some people may not know this as well, but we definitely want to make sure we're washing our hands as well after, if you happen to be a smoker, after that, you want to make sure you're washing your hands as well. All right. Got a couple of more. Wash your hands after chewing gum or tobacco. Absolutely. Because, of course, depending on what the situation may be, if you're throwing out the gum, sometimes you may dispose of that gum into your hand before you actually dispose of it into the garbage. So, of course, it is now coming in contact with your hands. With the tobacco, same thing. You're using your fingers to pack that tobacco into your mouth. So you want to make sure you're washing your hands after that as well. And we definitely want to make sure we're washing our hands after eating or drinking. Okay. And wash our hands before putting on gloves at the start of a new task. And yes, wash our hands after touching anything that may contaminate our hands. Okay. So, pretty much all the time, we want to make sure we are washing our hands at all times, no matter what it is, to keep yourself safe and, of course, keep others safe as well. Okay, then we're going to shift into hand antiseptics, using a hand antiseptic. So, of course, many of you know from previous classes, I always say that I am not a fan of hand sanitizers. Even now to this day, I prefer to wash my hands instead of using a hand sanitizer. I will probably use a hand sanitizer unless I could not get to a restroom to wash my hands. That is probably the only time that I'll use a hand sanitizer for the most part. Other than that, if I can get to a restroom to wash my hands, I'm definitely doing so. And the very first thing that it even tells you here, if you use a hand antiseptic, never use them instead of washing your hands. Hand antiseptics are meant to be used after you wash your hands. That's really the purpose of a hand antiseptic. Well, we do know right now, due to the circumstances, hand sanitizers are the most used common item right now with everything going on, because of course it is a safer route than not washing your hands at all. So of course hand sanitizers right now are very highly recommended and used at all times. And of course, then it says to wait for the hand antiseptic to dry before touching any food or equipment or putting on gloves. Okay. And then here it's asking you about where to wash your hands. Okay. So there are some, depending on, what kind of facility you have. If you happen to have a facility that happens to have a kitchen to it, then there's going to be some designated areas that you're supposed to do certain tasks. So when it comes to washing your hands, there will be a designated area that you need to wash your hands, and that happens to be a hand washing sink. All right, so it's asking you here, looking at this picture, is this a safe place to wash your hands? So just looking at the sink, it does not look like it's a safe place at all. No, it is not, because it looks like it's an actual sink that will be your 3-compartment sink that will be used in a kitchen. All right, so that is not the safest place for you to wash your hands. Then when it comes to the actual hand washing station, it says to make sure that you are not using the hand washing station to do anything else. You never want to dump dirty water in it. You never want to prep food in it. You never want to wash tools or equipment in it. A hand washing station is used for that and that only, to wash your hands. So it's asking, is this a safe practice? So it looks like some dirty water is being dumped into that hand washing station. And of course, we can just say absolutely no. It is not a safe practice, because as I mentioned, hand washing stations are to be used for washing your hands and only that. Okay. Then it says here to make sure your hand washing stations are easy to get to. You want to make sure they're easily accessible. They should not be blocked. They should never have any food, equipment, or supplies in them or in front of them. So it's asking here, looking at this picture, is this a safe practice? No, it is not. And I will tell you as well, if you happen to have a health inspector come and inspect your kitchen and they see this at a hand washing station, that will be something that you will get docked for. Okay. And the items that need to always be available at a hand washing station are hot and cold running water, liquid soap, single use paper towels, or a hand dryer, and a garbage container. So those items always need to be stocked at a hand washing station at all times. Okay. And then kind of shifting on over into other hand care guidelines when we're talking about gloves. Okay. So when we're using gloves, which again also now are items that are used quite often as well, we want to make sure we're using single use gloves when we're handling food. You want to make sure that they fit you comfortably. You don't want to have them too tight. You don't want to have them too loose. You also want to make sure that you never blow in them to make them easy for you to put on. Okay. And you also want to make sure that you don't roll them either. Okay. So it's asking you, what is wrong with this picture here? Well, the gentleman is blowing into the gloves, which is an absolute no-no. Okay. Then we also want to make sure that we never rinse, wash, or reuse gloves. And it's simply asking you here, what is wrong with that picture? Well, this individual is rinsing the gloves or washing the gloves. So if our gloves become dirty, you want to make sure you take those off, wash your hands again, and then put on a new pair. But never, ever reuse, rewash your gloves, or not rewash, but wash your gloves or rinse them. Okay, so when it comes to using gloves correctly, as I mentioned before, wash your hands before putting on gloves when starting a new task. Gloves should be changed as soon as they become dirty or torn. And gloves should be changed before beginning a different task and before or after handling any food with a known food allergen. Again, so we do not cause any cross-contamination. So you'll notice throughout everything, even though cross-contamination is one section, cross-contamination can apply to a lot of things, because it could apply to surfaces, it could apply to foods, it could apply to this particular situation when it comes to the gloves, because if we're using the same gloves to handle an allergen-free food and then an allergen food, that's also considered cross-contamination as well. So we want to make sure we are definitely avoiding that at all times. Also, we want to make sure we're changing gloves after handling raw meats, seafood, or poultry, and before handling ready to eat food. And then, of course, anytime that we're interrupted, such as taking a phone call, or if you have to step away. So if you step away, if you have to take a phone call, you're taking off those gloves that you previously had on, disposing of them, walking away, taking care of whatever it is that you need to take care of. And then once you return back to that duty, washing your hands again, and then putting on a new pair of gloves. All right. Then we're going to shift into the hands and nails. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're keeping our fingernails short and clean. Long fingernails can be hard to clean at times, so you want to make sure that you're keeping them nice and neat. And it says here, if you'll be handling exposed food, you must use single-use gloves if you are wearing nail polish or false fingernails. So that's definitely a no-brainer for us at all times. Anytime food is handled, whether or not you have nail polish on your fingers, whether or not you have false nails or long fingernails, whatever the case may be, gloves are to be worn at all times. Okay. So then it does ask you here, are these hands safe for handling exposed food? So in the event, hypothetically speaking, if you ever had to handle, which in this case, we will not, but if exposed food ever needed to be handled, just hypothetically speaking, between the two, which one would be the safest to actually handle the exposed food? So we've got a hand here that's got short fingernails, no nail polish, no false nails on it whatsoever. And then we've got another hand here that actually happens to have some nail polish on it. So between the two, which one would be the safest to actually handle exposed food? And you are right. The one that actually happens to have the short fingernails with no polish that are short and clean, that would be the appropriate one to handle exposed food. Okay, and that one would be a no. Okay, and so when it also comes to other hand care guidelines as well, if you happen to have any cuts, any burns, any type of bruises or anything of that sort on your hands, on your wrists or anywhere, you want to make sure that you're covering those areas as well before actually putting on a pair of gloves. So it says cover with a bandage or a finger cot that can prevent fluid from leaking out. Those of you that don't know what a finger cot looks like, a finger cot kind of looks like, if you look at that glove there in that picture, it really looks kind of like a latex glove. So it's literally designed to go onto your finger, and then it's got some beading at the end. So the same beading that happens to be on a glove at the very bottom happens to be on the very end of that finger cot. And then you're going to place that onto your finger, and then you would put on a pair of gloves, or you could actually put a Band-Aid as it mentions here as well. Then you want to make sure you're placing on single-use gloves over the cover. And then when it comes to your arms, completely cover with a bandage that prevents fluid from leaking out. And then your body, cover with a dry, durable, tight-fitting bandage. Okay, so it's asking, are these hands safe for handling exposed food? So we've got another situation here. So when it just comes to the hands, that's mainly what we're discussing here. It says this wound is only covered with a bandage. So we know definitely, nope, that is not safe to handle exposed food at all. Then we've got this gentleman over here to the right. It says the food handler is not wearing a hat or other hair covering. So even though that is an unsafe practice, when it comes down to it, handling exposed food, it's mainly just talking about the hands, which one would be the safest to actually handle that exposed food. And we're going to go with a no as well, because even though he does have gloves on, he is also not wearing any hair covering at all or a beard restraint. Okay, so that would also be a no as well. Neither one of them are actually safe to handle exposed food. So we want to make sure that we have all the correct garments, not only just the gloves. All right, so not only just the gloves, he has to have on all the correct garments in order to handle exposed food, period. Because even though he's got on gloves, he doesn't have a hairnet on and he doesn't have a beard restraint. So that's when a physical hazard can come into play, because he can have a piece of hair that can possibly get into that item that he happens to be repacking. So all in all, he has to have the complete correct garments in order to go ahead and handle that exposed food. All right. Then we're moving into clothing. So it says here, and other items as well, what you wear. So hair covering, we always want to make sure that we're wearing a clean hat or other hair covering when repackaging food, working in a clean room, working in areas used to clean utensils and equipment. So all in all, anytime we're handling any type of food, again, especially now with our circumstances, we just want to make sure that we're covered on all bases. And then it says men with beards and mustaches should always wear a beard restraint. So going back to that previous picture, our friend there, he was not wearing a hair covering, which would be a hairnet, and he was not wearing a beard restraint either. Okay, then also here when it talks about clothing, make sure you're wearing clean clothing whenever working with or around food. Remove or throw away disposable aprons when leaving clean rooms or food handling areas. And of course, make sure that you're storing your personal belongings away from food as well. Then when it comes to jewelry, normally that's not too much of an issue for us and the industry that we're in, but some places are a lot more strict than others. So it does talk about, not wearing specific type of jewelry, and you're only limited to wearing maybe a metal band, and that's about it. But as I mentioned, for us, I don't usually have a big restriction on whether or not you can and cannot wear jewelry, as long as, of course, it's not excessive to where something can possibly, break and a piece of jewelry can get into the food, because that's also considered a physical hazard as well. So just making sure that it's not too excessive, and you're fine. You should be good to go in that area. Okay, so I'm not really going to go into that, because it says not to wear certain types of jewelry, which, as I mentioned, is not an issue for us. But just make sure certain items, again, you may just want to take off if you are handling some types of food for a certain amount of time, for a long, extensive period of time. Okay, and then if you're sick, okay, if you're not feeling well, you definitely want to let someone know, and maybe you may not even want to come in. Again, with our circumstances nowadays, we don't want to take any chances. So it says to let your director or supervisor know if you've been diagnosed with a foodborne illness. Tell your director if you have the following symptoms. If you happen to have any vomiting, diarrhea, jaundice, which is yellowing of the skin and eyes, and either a sore throat with a fever. Okay. So it does ask you here in this applying your knowledge, which symptoms must be reported to your director or supervisor. So we definitely know the first one for sure, vomiting. And then that jaundice, which is the yellowing of the skin and eyes. Definitely sore throat with a fever. We're not going to report if we're very tired now, are we? And then if you happen to have diarrhea, and we don't have to report if you happen to have a headache as well. Okay, so we're done with that first section and we're moving on right into the next section, which is receiving and storing food safely. And the concepts you'll learn here is controlling time and temperature during receiving, inspecting food during receiving to make sure it is safe, and storing food safely. All right, so then we're going to talk about the temperature danger zone. Okay, this is a very, very important critical area that we want to make sure that we're keeping food out of, which is why taking temperatures is a very important practice to avoid this from happening, and also making sure you have your items that are cold and frozen being transported in a cooler or either being covered with a freezer blanket, because this is where we get into that area where it could be very dangerous. Okay, so it says that the temperature danger zone is an area where pathogens on food can grow in this range and cause a foodborne illness. All right, so all year round, we're always, definitely talking about how important it is to make sure you guys always have your freezer blankets and coolers. But the most time, usually, excuse me, that happens to be an issue would be our summer months, especially a lot of us, we're transporting items on the back of a pickup truck. We've got that sun beaming on the back of the truck and that food is exposed. There's no freezer blanket. And especially sometimes some folks have a longer distance to drive. That can definitely be a problem, and that temperature danger zone could definitely come into play if those items are not transported safely. So it says you have to consider and think about food temperatures that must be controlled. So you have to think about the time that the food from pickup from the donor or from the food bank to handoff to client. So those are definitely different time frames where temperatures can range in so many different areas. So you have to think about the time the food comes here to the food bank, the food is stored in the freezer or the chill area. The food then comes out to you all, you're taking it back to your agency, you've got that transport taking place. So you want to make sure that you're keeping it safe as well. Then when you get back to your agency, now placing it into your freezers and your refrigerators. Then after that, you've got the handoff to clients. So you've got so many different points there where, again, as I mentioned, the temperature danger zone could definitely play a big role in. So it says that includes time food spent in the warehouse, on the truck, and at the agency. Okay, so to make sure that you are maintaining your temperatures of food, you want to make sure you're using a temperature unit, and that would be an infrared thermometer. Okay, so a lot of you that have your temp guns, a lot of them you've either gotten them from us or outside sources, but this is probably your best practice to use. Your infrared thermometer not only is going to help you in that area, but it can also help you as far as maintaining the temperatures of your units as well. So your freezers, your refrigerators, because this measures surface temperature as well. It can even tell you that the surface temperature in the room as well. So which is why this happens to be my favorite unit to use to measure your temperatures. And also it prevents cross-contamination because you're not actually having to come in contact with the food. So this unit is not touching your food when you're taking a temperature of it. By all means, you're doing it from a distance. So there's no contamination that takes place there, which is why I like it as well. But then we do have some other tools here that are also used to measure temperatures. The next one is your thermocouple and other digital thermometers. This particular one, these other two, I would not recommend you to use those to take your temperatures of your food. Probably at home maybe, but not for your particular purpose, because these particular ones either do need to come in contact with food. The second one, you would use that, for example, you would take two pieces, let's just say you're taking two pieces of chicken, right? We're going to take two pieces of chicken, place that thermocouple digital thermometer in between the two pieces of chicken, wait for it to give you a reading, and that's how you'll know what the temperature is. So again, that's actually coming in contact with food, which can possibly, if not cleaned correctly, cause some cross-contamination. Then we've got our bimetallic stem thermometer. This is more so used for cooking, okay? So which is why you wouldn't really use that too much. So that is more so, for your roasts, your turkeys, your big birds that you actually have to insert deeply into that item to get a temperature. So your number one tool that you would use to get your temperatures of your cold and frozen items would be your infrared thermometer. Okay. And if anyone needs an infrared thermometer, I have them here at the food bank as well. We do sell them on hand, or you can actually get them, as I mentioned, either from outside sources, whether it's a Lowe's, Home Depot, somewhere online as well. Just make sure when you do get them from outside sources that you're getting the ones that read the correct temperature, that are not off by a certain amount of degrees, because if they are, you just have to keep in mind to keep deducting those degrees anytime you take a temperature. So, which is why I recommend when you do look for one, make sure you're reading the information so you're getting one that is actually accurate and you don't have to do any deduction. Okay, now we're going to talk about inspecting food during receiving as far as deliveries. Okay, what you should look for when you're inspecting a delivery vehicle. So you want to make sure you're checking the overall condition of the vehicle. You know, you want to make sure that the inside of the vehicle is not dirty. There's no signs of pests, okay? And of course that the vehicle is not severely dirty as well. And then you want to also make sure you're checking the condition of the product, because if there's something wrong with that product, you do not want to take on that issue, because you don't want, and then you don't want to bring that into your home. You want to bring that into your agency, you know, so you want to make sure that you are checking the condition, that there's no signs of anything. And then also you want to make sure that if there's any items that are possibly homemade or anything of that sort, that you would actually have to reject that as well. So anything that is homemade, unfortunately, we don't know the ingredients that went into that product to prepare that product, which we need to know anytime we're giving out any product. So that would be something that would actually, unfortunately, have to be rejected. We cannot accept that, nor can you either. Okay. Then moving into storage guidelines. So that temperature, again, making sure that we're storing refrigerated food at 41 degrees or lower. That includes cut produce. Keep frozen food frozen solid. The recommended temperature is 0 degrees or lower.
Please store food at least 6 inches off the floor and away from the wall. This is a change from our previous guidelines of 4 inches. So moving forward, please store food at least 6 inches off the floor and away from the wall.
Four inches for you guys. And make sure you're storing ready to eat food above raw meat, seafood, or poultry, as always, and do not store these items on the same shelf or pallet, and store food only in containers made for food, and wrap or cover food before storing it. Okay, so it's asking here, has the food been stored correctly? All right, so that very first picture, if you cannot see it too well, that is actually sour cream. All right, so it's saying the temperature that the sour cream is being stored is at 45 degrees. So that is entering that temperature danger zone. Okay, so that is a no, it is not stored correctly. All right, then the next one we've got, I always get these two confused. I want to say it's the very top one, the meat there, if that's stored correctly. We've got some frozen meat at the bottom, and we've got some frozen meat at the top as well. Are those stored correctly? Yes, they are. So there's no problem there. We don't have any ready to eat food at the very top or at the bottom. So they're both frozen, so they're stored correctly. And then the very last picture there at the very left-hand corner is the picture of a warehouse. Okay, so I always say, with the exception of those blue containers, because I never know, for the life of me, I've been teaching these classes for so long, I don't know what is in those blue containers. I've zoomed in, try to see, I don't know if it's a chemical or something of that sort. So I was always say, with the exception of the blue containers, is everything else in that warehouse stored correctly? Even with the blue containers, is everything stored correctly? So to me, looking at that picture, everything is stored correctly. There's nothing that's actually directly on the floor. The items that are on the lower level are also actually stored on pallets as well. So that is actually stored correctly too, because there's nothing actually touching the ground directly. Okay, then we've got a few more here. We've got some boxes that are against the wall. That's an absolute no-no as well, because we want to make sure, again, that they're stored 4 inches away from the wall, away from the floor, off of the floor, and away from the wall. So that is a no. All right. Then we've got some fruit at the very top there over to our right hand corner. We've got some fruit above our meat or chicken, I think it is there at the bottom. So it's asking if that is stored correctly, and that is a yes. Then over here down to the bottom to the left, we've got some produce that happens to be bagged and stored away. Is that stored correctly? Yes, it is. And then last but not least, we've got some bananas. These bananas are sitting directly on the floor. Okay, so that is definitely a no-no. They are not stored correctly. Remember, everything has to be off of the floor. You could not have anything stored directly on the floor because the floor is dirty. Okay, the floor is dirty, and then sometimes the way that your pantry may be, you may actually have to stack those boxes on top of each other. So just imagine if I took another box and actually that box was also directly on the floor, stored that box on top of those bananas that happen to be open and exposed. They're not even wrapped up in bags or anything of that sort. And then I'm taking that box and storing that on top of that. So whatever dirt was on that floor that is now transferred on to that box has now, gotten onto those bananas. So that's the reason why, you don't want to store anything on the floor directly because the floor is dirty. And then, if you happen to have any type of issue with any type of pests or anything of that sort, that's definitely going to be a problem for you as well. So that's the reason why everything has to be off of the floor. And then also when you're storing your items, as far as labeling, you just want to make sure that everything, of course, is labeled. Food should be labeled with the receiving date. This ensures products can be rotated out. And then receiving dates should be placed on individual containers or cases or on pallet tags. So whatever type of system you have for labeling in your pantry, that is fine as long as everything has an actual label on it at all times. All right, then we're moving into our dates. Okay, so this is also a very important section as well, knowing the difference by your different titles of your best by, sell by, use by, best of use by, because being that we are in the food banking industry, a lot of the items that we may receive can be donated. Not everything is always within date. So this is why it's important to know this information so that you can also educate your clients as well, so they know the difference as well and don't feel like you gave them something that was either bad or out of date. Okay, so the very first one that we're going to go over is the sell by date. And the sell by date simply says that is a quality date. It tells the store how long to display the product for sale. The product is still safe to eat past this date. Okay, so that's more so for the store's purpose. So they know now, okay, it's time to take this particular item off the shelf and then now bring in our newer products. Okay, then moving on to best by or best of use by. This is also a quality date. It tells the client the date by which the product should be eaten for best flavor or quality. The product is still safe to eat past this date. So basically that's letting you know that after this particular date, that item is going to just basically start to break down. It's not going to maybe look the same. It may not taste the same as it did when it was in date. So it's not necessarily saying that after that date that you have to dispose of it. It's just going to, as the days go by, start to break down. And then eventually, of course, you will have to dispose of it. But of course, even after that date, it is still safe for you to consume that item. All right. Then we've got use by or expiration date. So my only gripe with the two here is that I feel like they need to be separated, because expiration date is the date that I always tell you all that you do have to adhere by. If you have an item that says expired or expiration date and that date either has approached or it is slowly approaching, you either need to, of course, use that item right away, or if that date has approached, dispose of that item. And it says here that this is the last recommended date for the product while at peak quality. The product is still safe to eat past this date, not with expiration, okay? Because especially when it comes to our baby food, formula, and also those supplemental drinks like your Boost, your Ensure, those actually have dates on them. Those do have expiration dates on them, and you want to adhere to those dates. So if it has today's date on it and it says expired, definitely dispose of that item, because that item is not safe to eat. And we don't want to give that to a baby whose immune system is not completely there yet, or a senior. So we definitely want to get rid of those items if it does say expired on it. All right. Then we've got other items. Some canned goods may not necessarily have a date on there. There may be a series of numbers, and we always wonder what those numbers mean. It's more so a packing or manufacturing date that the manufacturer may use for tracking and if there's any recalls. So if there happens to be a recall on a particular item, they may not necessarily recall the whole entire batch of tuna fish. Okay. So they'll tell you that it is batch XYZ that was packed and manufactured on this particular time frame, and those were the items that happened to be affected. So nowadays, for the most part, I do see some dates on canned goods, but if you don't and you just see a series of numbers, that's actually what those numbers mean. It's not actually either a sell by date, a use by, an expiration date. It's more so for that particular purpose. All right. So it says here, shelf life for refrigerated food and storage. If food has a sell by date or no date at all, it says follow Feeding America's guidelines, which is freeze the food and distribute the food. So those are basically your two options. Freezing will keep it safe for long periods of time. Quality will suffer if frozen food is stored too long. And that is absolutely true. So even if you look at that tilapia there, the tilapia looks like it's been frozen for quite a long time. So again, as I was mentioning before, even about the other titles, that after a while, that particular product is not necessarily going to look the same as excuse me, it would if you went to the store and purchased some tilapia or any other particular product that you happen to have that is without a date. It will definitely look different. It's not gonna, even the color, the color may change a little bit, because remember, when it comes to our meats and things of that sort, those items are injected with dyes, of course, to make it look pretty and presentable. But the actual color of meat is going to be brown once that dye actually starts to disappear. So that's another factor there where folks might get confused and think that the food is going bad, that it doesn't look good because of the fact that that dye is actually now disappearing. And that's what we're used to when we go into a store. We're used to seeing that pretty red, beautiful pink meat. And that's not necessarily always going to be the case after that date happens to approach. Okay. So when it comes to handling a recall, so it says, ask your director or supervisor how to handle recalls at your food bank or agency. Feeding America issues recall notices for all issued recalls from FDA to USDA. So as I've mentioned in the past before, when we have a recall here, there is a certain process that we do have to follow, depending on what that particular item is, if it's something that was either donated or if it's something that we have on the product list. So the very first thing that we're going to do is, of course, if it's something that happens to be on the product list and happens to be either purchased, is remove it off of the product list right away so no one else can purchase that particular item. Then we're going to see what agencies purchase that item. And then depending on the severity, of course, we're going to notify the agency either way, but depending on the severity, we will then give them instructions on what it is that they need to do. If it's something severe that requires further investigation, we may ask you to bring that product back here to the food bank. And then if it's not as severe, we may just either tell you to go ahead and dispose of that item. Okay. But usually that's the process that we'll follow here. If it's something that's donated, we will then remove it we'll check in our sorting room to make sure that item is not in any of those baskets. And then we will also, depending on the severity, quarantine that item or put it to the side if it's needed for further investigation, and then we'll go from there. But there is a process. Pretty much that's the gist of the process. Anytime we have something that happens to be in-house and it was recalled, usually we will definitely notify you, whether it's by phone call, by letter, and then again, just depending on that severity, if you need to, of course, inform your clients as well, as far as what the steps are that they need to do. Okay. And if you have your books, there should be a handout also that provides you with the actual step-by-step process of what we would do in the event that we had a recall. Okay. Then we also want to make sure that we're rotating our food out. Okay. If you're purchasing more of the same product on different occasions, and maybe those different occasions, that particular product has different dates, you definitely want to make sure you're using the first in, first out, which is an abbreviation for FIFO. Okay, so check your delivery date and then store food with the earliest delivery date in front of the food with later dates, and then use the food stored in front first. I personally happen to follow that practice. I don't buy too many canned goods, but if I'm buying tuna, kidney beans, or anything of that sort, and I'm buying them on different occasions, I'm making sure when I come home, I'm bringing the one that I have in my cabinet forward to the front, and then the one that I just purchased, that's going to go in the back. So I'm going to use the one that was already at home first, and then the one that I just purchased, I'll use that a little bit later. So that is the same practice that you should follow as well with your pantries at all times. So it's asking you here, has it been rotated correctly? So the date is 2014. Which storage shelf has the cans stored correctly? So we've got A and B. And which one do you all think it is? We're going to go with B. So I know it can look confusing because you never know which is the actual front of the cabinet, if you will. But as you can see here, B happens to have the items that will expire earlier or go out of date earlier to the front, and then the ones that will go out of date later to the back. So those have been brought, and then the following date after that very first one, and then the later date goes in the very back. So that would be the correct way for you to store your cabinets or pantry. All right, so now we're done with that section. Moving on to the next section, we are rolling. Evaluating, repacking, and transporting food safely. And the concepts you'll learn here is evaluating the condition of food, repacking food, and loading and transporting food safely. Okay, so here we're actually now talking about the conditions of our shelf-stable items. Okay, so this is usually for the folks that may, the ones that usually will say they don't do any fresh produce or do any ready-to-eat items. Mainly, they usually just have shelf-stable items. Well, food safety is important also when it comes to our shelf-stable items. There are things that you need to make sure you're looking for. You need to make sure certain things are intact when it comes to our shelf-stable items. So we're going to go over this section, and I'm also going to just show you guys a couple of things too that I have here that may be in reference to our shelf-stable items. So the very first one says here, you definitely want to discard cans if they have severe dents in the can seam. So I've got one here. It's not as severe as the one in the picture, but we've got a dent right there in the can seam. And it's actually also on this other end as well here, okay? That part is not, again, as severe, but here's a little bit more serious than the other side. So we wanna make sure we're disposing of this can as well if it happens to look like that can does. Then if there's any dents, deep dents in the can body, crushed can, excuse me, that are not stackable, all right? So I've got this big, huge number 10 can. So I'll even face it over to the side so you can really see that dent right here. So this is really a bad dent in this can. And honestly, when I place this can on the table, it kind of even rocks a little bit. So I can't even store another can on top of here because of that severe denting. It's really taken off the balance of this can. So storing another can, as it says, you cannot stack another can on top of this one because of the fact that it's severely dented there in the can body. All right, and then I'm gonna bring this guy back up again for the next one. It says missing labels, unreadable labels due to stains or tears or no code dates. So right here, we've got, a mystery can, also another one that has severe denting in the can body, but we've got a mystery can. We don't know what's in this can. We don't want to open it and figure out, what may be in here, because even if you did open it and you know what it is, you still cannot give this out to a client because of the fact that it's missing the label, which you need the nutritional facts and the ingredients. Again, when we're going to go back and talk about our allergens, that's something that a client needs to know. If they're severely allergic to something, depending on what's in here, you never know what actually could be mixed with this particular item, what juice it's sitting in, or what was used to prepare this particular item in the can. So you don't want to take the chance of opening and saying, okay, well, there's some string beans in here, and then give it out to a client. You still need to know the sodium content in this particular item, okay? You still need to know what other ingredients went into this item. So if anytime you are given cans that look like this, unfortunately, you do have to dispose of that particular can. Okay, then the next one is swollen or bulging ends. I have a can that looks like that, but I'm not going to bring it into camera view. Those of you that have, of course, come to my class have seen that can and what it looks like. And I always say every single time that it scares me, because my particular can is not only just bulging on one end, but it is severely bulging on both ends. So anytime you have any cans that are bulging, not just only on one end or both ends, any type of bulging whatsoever, definitely dispose of that. I would even take it a step further. I wouldn't even throw it away in your trash can indoors. I would immediately take it outside and dispose of it out there, because you just don't want to take any chances with that. Okay. Then the next one is rust that cannot be wiped off. So looking at that particular picture, that looks like maybe, all right, some liquid or some sort happened to spill on that can, and maybe in a couple of days it started to rust a little bit because it was still sitting there. You can wipe it off and it's fine. But anytime you have any severe rusting, just like you do with this can here, that rust is pretty much embedded into this can, and it cannot be wiped off. So even though it's at the bottom, there's still a problem. It's not necessarily at the top. That is still a problem, because not only just at the bottom, but just looking at the can alone, you can just tell that this is something that's very, very old. And it's so old, I can't even really see what the date might be, if there is a date on here. There are some code dates as well, but it is just something that I would not personally feel safe anyway, opening it or, consuming it, regardless of how long. So anytime you have any cans that happen to have rust that look like that, definitely dispose of that too, because you don't want to open up that can and then chance the fact of that rust getting inside your food. Okay, so dispose of that immediately as well. And then if there's any holes, visible signs of leaking indicated by stained labels, unfortunately, I don't have one of those anymore. I used to, but of course had to dispose of it. Why? Because it was leaking. So I don't have any more of the cans that actually have any holes in them. How that happens, I don't know, but it is apparently is possible to puncture a hole into a can. Okay, so it's asking you here, which of these cans should be discarded? So we've got A through G. Looking at all of these cans, which ones do you all think need to be discarded? So definitely A, we've got that denting around the can seam. B, we've got that severe denting in the body. Definitely C, because it's missing a label. E, because we've got the bulging can. F, we've got that rusting that cannot be wiped off of the top of the can. And then G, because of the hole that happens to be inside, on the side there of the can body. But out of all of them, D seems to be the perfect can. Nothing wrong with the can. The label is still intact. No denting in the can body, no denting in the seam. No holes, no rust, no bulging. So that happens to be our perfect can. Okay, then we're going to move into jars or bottles. Okay, so it's asking discard jars and bottles with these problems. So the very first one, it says it's missing a label, unreadable label, and no code dates. Okay, so now when we shift on over into our jarred goods or bottles, even though they may be glass, and we, again, just kind of like the canned good, you can open it and see what's in it. Same thing with the jars. You don't even have to open it and see through it. And maybe you may know what it is. Even though you may know what it is, you still cannot give that out to a client. Why? Again, because it's missing that label. So I think those are probably either some roasted peppers. So even though you may know, okay, those are roasted peppers, however, there's some oil that's sitting in, that those roasted peppers are sitting in. And there's probably some other ingredients as well. So that also has to be provided on that label. A client needs to know those nutritional facts. So we need to have that information there as well. Then the next one is the jar of pasta. So it says there's signs of leakage. The jar is chipped or broken. So of course, we're definitely not going to keep that particular jar of pasta sauce, because it's something that will, of course, cause a larger issue. Then we've got some preservatives. I think there are preservatives here at the very bottom. And like I always say here, this one it looks like some type of science project is taking place. So it says food contains mold or foreign objects and signs of dirt or mold under the lid. So of course, we definitely want to dispose of that immediately. And then we've got this jar of mayonnaise. So it says food is discolored and food has an unusual appearance or separation. All right. So when it starts separating and, like I mentioned in the other one, turning into a science project, you definitely want to dispose of it. Okay. There should not be any separation going on. The only thing that should be separating is oil and vinegar, or if you happen to have the peanut butter. Excuse me, the natural peanut butter. Those are the only items that should have some separation from each other because of the oil and the vinegar, or the oil and the actual peanut butter. Other than that, there should not be any type of separation going on there with that mayo. That's how you know it's now time to dispose of it. Okay. And then also checking commercially packaged dry food for defects. You want to make sure you're doing that too. So if you happen to get a big bag of rice, a big bag of potatoes, a big bag of onions, it says some dry food is packaged in a single package. Other food is double packaged with the food contained in an inner packaging. That includes flour, cereal, pasta, bread, and rice. So example, I've got this particular, I've shown you guys this as well in class a couple of times. So we've got this Uncle Ben's rice. So the box looks like it went through war for sure. However, the contents on the inside are still intact. So because the contents on the inside are still intact, and looking at the very side here where the nutritional facts and the ingredients, that's still visible, that is still available. Even though the box went through war, you can still give this out to a client. Client may not feel like they should get this, but just explain to them there's nothing wrong with the contents on the inside. The bag is still sealed, there's no holes, so it is still okay. Now, the only time that this would usually be a problem is if you have the rice, for example, the one that either goes in the microwave maybe, or the one that you boil in the bag on the stove. Those bags happen to have little holes in them. So now if this was the opposite case where you happen to have that minute rice, or the rice that you do over the stove, then you would actually have to dispose of that, because there's a possibility that, anything could have seeped into those little holes, bugs, or anything. So you want to make sure then that's when you would actually discard of something like that. Okay. So anything that happens to have that inner packaging, make sure if the box or, the outside of that container looks the way mine did, that you're inspecting the inside to make sure that it's still sealed. There's no holes or any leakage or anything of that sort as well. All right. And then it says discard commercially packaged dry food with these problems: unreadable, unlabeled or not correctly labeled, unreadable labels, or no code dates. So that's the same thing with this right here. It's kind of the same thing. I think in the picture there, that might be confectional sugar maybe, but we don't know because there's no label. There's absolutely nothing on it, nor am I going to open it to try to taste it to figure out what it is. Because again, if it's someone that happens to be allergic to something, that is something I would highly not recommend for that individual to do, because depending on that individual's severity of those allergens, it can cause some problems. Okay. So something like this, as I mentioned, for example, there's no label on it. Yes, we may know what it is. It looks like maybe some type of curry, but I'm not going to take the chance of opening this to figure out, number one, is it still good, or is it actually curry? I don't want to take that chance. So if we have something like this, unfortunately, you will have to dispose of it as well, because there's no information on that whatsoever. Damaged, wet, stained. So if there's something that happens to be wet, or if it's stained, or if it's damaged, as I mentioned, just like going back to that rice, the outside of the box is damaged, but on the inside, it happens to be okay. There's no type of damage to the packaging of rice. It's not wet and it's not stained as well. If there's any signs of pests, gnaw marks, droppings, insects, whether the insects are dead or alive, pin size holes in the packaging, also, that would be a problem. You'd have to discard of that. And single package food that is exposed. If it's open packaging, ripped or torn packaging, punctured or cut packaging split at the seams. And we usually run into this issue when folks are donating items to us. Sometimes they may donate and it may be something that was previously used, or if there's still quite a lot of product left over, and they don't want to throw it away because they feel that someone else can use it. Unfortunately, once something is opened, it cannot be then donated for another use. It would have to be discarded. So if there anything that you're going to receive that was possibly used already, then you would have to dispose of that item as well. Okay. And then moving into produce, discard, produce with these problems. So if there's any mold, decay, or rotting or bad odors going on, well, we know with strawberries, when we purchase strawberries initially from the grocery store, there may be one or two out of the batch that may have a little bit of mold on it. And all you need to do is dispose of those and then wash the other ones out and then put them in the refrigerator. However, if the strawberries look like this picture does, then we definitely want to dispose of that, and any produce, not only just strawberries. And it also says if there's any severe bruises, skin that is not intact, bruises provide a way for pathogens to get inside. So you want to make sure that there is no, even tomatoes sometimes, I know that happens with anything that might be a little bit soft, as you can see in that very bottom picture there. The tomatoes actually split open. So it says skin that is not intact. Again, it also provides a way for pathogens to get inside. So we don't want that happening. And I always usually explain produce kind of the same way, like when you have a cut on your finger, right? So that's why it was a couple of screens back, I was talking about making sure anytime you are, when it comes to cut produce, that that's also kept at 41 degrees or lower. So the same thing here, anytime something happens to be open or the skin is not intact, it's kind of like a cut on your finger or any type of wound that you may have. You want to make sure you are nursing that wound, that you are taking care of it, making sure it's covered with a bandage so that no type of bacteria or anything can get into that cut and then infect it and make it worse. So it's kind of the same similar situation with produce. Anytime that it's cut open, we want to keep it safe. We want to maintain it at a certain temperature. We don't want to leave it out, because then that's leaving an opportunity for your biological hazard to take place, where, you know, some type of pathogens can get inside and then cause some type of issue. So you want to make sure that you are either refrigerating anything that you cut, any type of produce that you're cutting into. And then if your produce happens to have any problems, like it shows here in these slides, that you are discarding of those items as well. So speaking of which, I kind of got ahead of myself here. Cut produce not at 41 degrees or lower, or if there's no code dates as well. So if you have anything that's cut, if it's not at 41 degrees or lower, you have to discard of that too. Repackaging, packaging not safe for use with food. Signs of insects, live insects, insect bodies, or insect eggs. We want to make sure that if anyone is donating any type of produce to you, especially something that happens to be in large quantities, like collard greens or anything of that nature, that they are not being donated in garbage bags. You know, you don't want anything of that sort that's either ready to eat donated to you in a garbage bag, because nowadays a lot of these garbage bags are lined also with some type of deodorizer to make that trash smell good. Well, I'm not going to say necessarily make the trash smell good, but so the trash doesn't smell so bad. Okay, so they're lining or putting a nice smelling deodorizer in the garbage bag, and that's meant for your trash. So you don't want food being put into that same bag as well, because now that's going back to those hazards. That's considered a chemical hazard, because that chemical is now going to come in contact with your food. So you definitely want to make sure that no one is donating food to you in that manner as well. Oops, let's go back here. Went a little bit too far. And then at the very bottom, broken, tampered, resistant, sealed, or either damaged packaging. So shifting on into medicines, reject medicines with these problems. So when I'm talking about medicines, I'm not talking about medications, someone's personal medication that was prescribed to them. I'm mainly talking about your over-the-counter medicines, okay? So if you happen to receive a large donation, maybe from a CVS, a Walgreens, a Rite Aid, whichever location of medications, you want to make sure, of course, that they're still within date. You also want to make sure that that the labels are still intact, like there's no evidence of any type of tampering taking place. And then you also want to make sure all the information that you need to know about that drug is intact as well. As if you look at the very bottom picture, maybe some water or some type of liquid came in contact with that particular packaging, and it took off a lot of the information that you need to know about that drug. So it says here, label is not intact or readable. It's missing the common name of the drug, the list of ingredients, the quantity of the contents, the instructions for the correct use. So again, everything that you need to know about that particular drug is missing. So I would not chance it. That is something that also needs to be rejected and disposed of as well. All right. And then moving into applying your knowledge, which of these medications should be rejected. So looking at all three of them, it looks like they all have what we just recently mentioned, which is the first one. Yes, because it's got the label that looks like it was actually tampered with. So that would be something that you would reject and dispose of. And then B, yes, because it is definitely out of date. And then C, it is also missing the label and everything that you need to know about that drug as well. So you will dispose of that too. Okay. And then moving on into preparing delivery vehicles to protect food from contamination. So when we are, of course, transporting food from whether it's here at the food bank, whether you're doing your grocery rescue pickups or your food rescue pickups, also known as that, we want to make sure that we are transporting that food in clean vehicles. A lot of us are using our personal vehicles when we're doing pickups, so we want to make sure that they are clean at all times. It says at least once per week or as often as necessary, depending on how often you're doing your pickups. Make sure vehicles are pest-free. Never deliver food in vehicles used to haul garbage. Do not bring pets when delivering food. Keep items that could contaminate food separate from delivery. So that includes any oil, antifreeze, or windshield wiper fluid. So I know me personally, I've got some items that are in the back of my trunk. I've got some antifreeze. I know I've got some windshield wiper fluid back there, or anything that I'm using when I'm, washing my vehicle. So those are all considered chemicals. So anytime that I'm going to be doing any type of food pickup, even of course for my personal, I'm going to make sure those items are separate from my food, that I'm not going to basically put anything in my trunks for that reason, because that did happen to me before. I did have some detergent in the back of my trunk and I did not close it all the way and it spilt all in the back of my trunk. Thank goodness that there was nothing as far as food in the back of that trunk. But that's the reason why you want to make sure those items are separated from each other, because if something is not closed all the way and it happens to spill, sometimes some things are clear. They don't have a color to them. They don't have a smell to them, and you won't even know. So that's why you want to have those things out of your trunk or wherever you may keep them in your vehicle anytime you're transporting food. And then of course, lock and seal delivery vehicles when they are not being loaded or unloaded. Okay, so it's asking what's wrong with the delivery. So the very first one here, do not leave food outside and unsupervised. So that food, we don't know how long that food has been sitting there. You definitely want to make sure when you're doing your pickups, the food is immediately coming inside the building and you are storing it right away. It is not sitting there for hours and hours and hours at a time, especially when you've got anything that needs to be refrigerated or frozen. It needs to immediately come inside and be stored immediately. Then we've got some refrigerated or frozen food. So it says do not leave refrigerated or frozen food at room temperature. Okay, again, that's that time and temperature abuse. We want to make sure that we're not causing that issue as well, to where we are allowing that time and temperature abuse to take place for pathogen growth. All right, and then it says also do not put food by garbage containers. Okay, so we never know. Garbage containers, there's trash going in there, there's food going in there, meaning sometimes, there's pests and maybe rodents. So if you're leaving food that is good food at a trash can, that can cause an issue as well. So you want to make sure that there isn't anything next to a garbage container. And then you also want to make sure you're keeping chemicals separate from your foods as well, as we were just mentioning with the items in the back of your trunk too. Then you want to, as far as prepping food for transport, use boxes that are sturdy, clean, and dry. Keep food in pest-free areas. Keep shelf-stable food in a clean, dry storage area. And then keep meat, poultry, and seafood separate from each other and away from other food as well. Okay. And then it asks you what is wrong with the way the food was loaded. So the very first picture says, do not store allergens over other products. So you want to make sure, again, during transport and even during storage, that those items are separate from each other. So we've got milk stored above allergen-free food there. And then the other picture, do not store chemicals with food products as well. So as we mentioned before, keeping those separate from each other. Okay. And then it says when loading and transporting food, again, that temperature danger zone, keeping refrigerated food at 41 degrees or lower during transport. If possible, keep frozen food at temperatures that will keep frozen. Keep food cold in unrefrigerated vehicles. Always, I will repeat this again, always cover refrigerated and frozen food with thermal blankets or place them in coolers with ice packs. So it has to be one or the other. You have to make sure anytime you're picking up any frozen or cold items that those items are either in a cooler with ice, and there has to be some type of ice or ice packs in the cooler. They could not just be absolutely nothing in the cooler and then you're just placing items in there, because that defeats the purpose as well. Or you're using your freezer blankets. And when you're using your freezer blankets, make sure when you throw that freezer blanket over your product that you're tucking the rest of the blanket, if there's any more room, tucking that blanket underneath the product so we're keeping that air and it is circulating nicely underneath that freezer blanket. Okay, and load refrigerated and frozen food so air can circulate around it. Again, I'm ahead of myself, but definitely make sure you have that circulation going on as well. Okay, and then making sure that you're keeping your drive times in unrefrigerated vehicles to 30 minutes or less. Okay, so we do have some folks, of course, that are traveling from a lot further, coming to us and, of course, going back. So those agencies definitely have to make sure that they always have those freezer blankets and coolers at all times for that reason. And then, of course, you're checking the temperature of refrigerated food when it has reached its destination. And then, of course, you're documenting it as well. Okay. All right, so that ends that section. Then we're moving on into cleaning and sanitizing, which is the last section here. And the concepts you'll learn is how and when to clean and sanitize, how to manually clean and sanitize tools and utensils, handling garbage, and of course, spotting pests. All right, so when it comes to cleaning and sanitizing surfaces, there is definitely a difference between the two. Cleaning removes food and other dirt from a surface. Sanitizing reduces pathogens on a surface to safer levels. So that is the difference between the two. Cleaning is just basically going to clean that spill, that dirt, whatever it is that you may have on a surface. And then sanitizing, which is what we're going to do after we clean, reduces pathogens to safer levels. Okay, so when it comes to cleaning and sanitizing surfaces, all surfaces that must be cleaned and rinsed. We've got walls and floors, storage shelves, and garbage containers. And then it asks you here, your very first question, does it need to be cleaned or cleaned and sanitized? Okay, so we've got a mop head there, and then we've got a scale that's used for food. So with the mop head, we're gonna say that just needs to be cleaned. And then with the scale, it definitely needs to be cleaned and sanitized. Anything coming in contact with food that we're going to use has to be cleaned and sanitized. Okay, so any surface, again, that touches food must be cleaned and sanitized. Plastic food bins, ladles, scales, prep tables and clean rooms, sorting tables, and scoops. All right, and then here, how to clean and sanitize. It gives you the 5 steps in order. So as I mentioned before, you've got cleaning and then you've got sanitizing. So the first thing we're going to do is scrape or remove food from the surface, and then wash the surface, and then rinse the surface. So those first 3 steps would basically be your cleaning process. Then when we introduce the sanitizer, we're going to sanitize the surface and allow that surface to air dry. What you don't want to do is introduce the sanitizer and then wipe the surface after you sanitize it. That then defeats the whole purpose. You want to leave that sanitizing solution on that surface and allow it to air dry. Okay, so it asks you here the very first questions. Put the steps of cleaning and sanitizing in the right order by placing the numbers of each step in the space provided. All right, so the very first one, let's see which one is going to be the very first step. Number 1, scrape or remove food from the surface. That's going to be the very first one. Number 2, wash the surface. Then we're going to rinse the surface. Then we're going to sanitize the surface. And then we're going to allow that surface to air dry. Okay, so those are the steps there in order of how to clean and sanitize. When to clean and sanitize: before and after each use, before repacking food, when changing to a new product or between allergens after 4 hours if the items have been in constant use and anytime the item has become contaminated. Okay, so it's asking you here, which items must be cleaned and sanitized? So the very first one, Jorge has used the same scoop to portion cereal for an hour. No, Jorge doesn't need to do anything. He's been using the same scoop. It doesn't tell us that the scoop has fallen on the floor. It doesn't tell us that Jorge is doing anything else. He is only scooping that cereal and portioning it. That's all he is doing. So Jorge does not need to do anything. I gave you the answer for the next one. Bob, now he goes ahead and drops that scoop on the floor while using it. So he definitely has to have that scoop cleaned and sanitized. How about Shelly? Shelly has finished repackaging produce on a prep table and now will use it to repack cereal. Yes, Shelly definitely has to make sure she is cleaning and sanitizing that particular surface, that prep table, because now she's introducing a new item to that area. All right. And how about Maria? Maria is about to start scooping bulk rice into smaller bags. Okay. Well, Maria doesn't have to do anything else there because she's getting ready to start the task. Nothing actually has happened yet, so nothing has to take place there. So the only people that have to clean and sanitize their areas or their utensils would be Bob and Shelly. Okay. And also, in order when you're using a sanitizing solution here, to make sure that sanitizer is effective, you want to make sure you're doing that, and you can do that with a test kit. So the first thing it says here, how to make sure sanitizers are effective. Make sure the water is at the correct temperature. Make sure the correct amount of sanitizer, was used. And you can do that by using a test kit. Okay, so the test kit will check the sanitizer's strength to tell you whether or not it's strong enough or maybe it's too weak. And then you want to leave the items being sanitized in contact with the sanitizer for the correct amount of time and allow the sanitizer to air dry on the surface. Okay. And then when it comes to handling our garbage, we want to make sure that we're moving the garbage out as quickly as possible. So if we happen to we're bringing our food back to our agency. We're going through everything as we are storing it and putting it away. If there's anything that happens to be bad, of course, we're throwing that in the trash. And after we're done with that task, we want to immediately take that trash out right away. We don't want that trash sitting because we don't want to cause any bugs or anything of that sort. And then if there's any spillage as well, you just don't want any issues. So definitely take that trash out as soon as possible. Be careful not to contaminate food or surfaces while removing garbage. Clean the inside and outside of garbage containers as often as possible, because again, while we've got trash bags in the garbage containers, sometimes those trash bags can get holes in them. Whatever's in that trash that you may have had can seep and then get into that garbage container itself. So we want to make sure we're cleaning those as often as possible. And then do not clean garbage containers in clean rooms or food storage areas. Close the lids on outdoor containers and keep indoor containers covered when they are not in use. Okay, so it's asking, how is the garbage being handled safely? So this first young lady here, she's actually cleaning that garbage container in a designated area. She's not doing it around food. She's actually doing it outside. Okay, and then the very bottom right underneath that picture, we've got a garbage container on the outside. That lid is closed. It is not open, which is, as mentioned in the previous slide, that you want to make sure you're keeping your garbage containers closed at all times. Then over to the right here, it's asking what's wrong with the way this garbage was handled. So as what I previously mentioned before, we've got garbage that happens to be just piling up there. The garbage bags are not closed. So if it gets knocked over, everything could fall out. Then we've got a recycling can there, a recycling bin over to the side that happens to have cans filled all the way to the top to where they're even having to store them to the side. And it even looks like some of that corn has now spilt onto the floor. So that's a major problem going on right there. They needed to start taking out that garbage as soon as possible, okay, to avoid this situation from happening, is what I was mentioning before, okay? And spotting pests. Pests such as rodents basically can get into your operation in many ways. And once they're inside, they will stay if they find food and shelter. So you want to make sure that you do not have that situation, because pests carry pathogens that can make people sick. That's why it's important to keep your operation clean and be able to spot signs of pests. So when we're talking about rodents, which will be your mice and rats, it says some signs that you have them in your operation. If there's any gnaw marks, dirt trackings along the walls, droppings, nets, rats and mice use soft materials such as scraps of paper, cloth, hair, feathers, and grass to build their nests. Then when we're talking about cockroaches, if there's any type of capsule-shaped egg cases, strong oily odors, droppings that look like grains of black pepper, that means that you have signs of cockroaches in your operation. Okay. And then going on into the next, applying your knowledge, the very last one here, it says, who am I? Write a C next to the statement if it applies to a cockroach, and write an R next to the statement if it applies to a rodent. So the very first one, I nest in scraps of paper, cloth, and hair. That would be your rodent. I produce a strong, oily odor. That would be your cockroach. I like to gnaw on things. That will be your rodent. And my droppings look like grains of pepper. That will be your cockroach. And last but not least, I produce capsule-sized eggs. That would be your cockroach. All right. So this includes basically our food safety training for today. Now what you're going to do is head on over to the SurveyMonkey to complete your test. And after that is completed, I will then receive a notification stating that you've completed that section. After that, your certificate will be created and I will get your certificate out to you. I want to thank you for your time today, sharing your day with me. I know this is, again, a new normal for us. I'm used to everyone being in a classroom setting with me, but until we can get back to that time, this is the way that we're going to keep our classes going for now. So again, I thank you for your time and you have a wonderful day. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to reach out. My email address is lbenson, so my first initial and my last name at foodbankonline.org. Again, that is lbenson at foodbankonline.org. Or if you need to reach me by phone, my number is area code 757-314-4573. Again, that is 757-314-4573. Again, I want to thank you so much for your time and have a wonderful day and continue to stay safe. Bye-bye.
Are you allergic to sesame? Well, there's some news that might help make life a little easier for you. Starting January 1st, 2023, sesame will be required to be labeled as an allergen on food packages. It joins 8 other major food allergens in the U.S. Here's what the new labeling might look like. The name of the food source of a major food allergen must appear either in parentheses following the name of the ingredient or immediately after or next to the list of ingredients in a contained statement. It's important to note food products already on their way to or on store shelves before 2023 don't have to be removed from the market, so proceed with caution during this transition period. Consumers should contact the manufacturer or distributor identified on the food product's label for information if they need to know more about the use of sesame in a food product. These labeling requirements apply to packaged foods. Labeling requirements for non-packaged foods may vary. If you're concerned about those products, you may want to ask store personnel for food allergen information. Head over to our website to learn more.